Marcus Chen had always dreamed of visiting London. The 24-year-old social media influencer from California had built a modest following of 30,000 people by posting travel pranks and comedy sketches. His content was usually harmless, silly videos that made people laugh during their lunch breaks or boring commutes. He filmed himself doing funny dances in public places, pretending to be a statue, or asking strangers unusual questions. Nothing too crazy, nothing that would hurt anyone. At least that was what he told himself. When Marcus finally saved enough money for his London trip, he was beyond excited. He had planned every single day of his 2-week vacation down to the hour. Tower of London on Monday, British Museum on Tuesday, Camden Market on Wednesday. But the one place he wanted to visit more than anywhere else was Buckingham Palace. He had seen countless videos of the famous palace guards in their red uniforms and tall bearskin hats, standing perfectly still while tourists tried to make them laugh or react. It was a classic London attraction, and Marcus knew his followers would love content from there. On his 3rd day in London, Marcus woke up early and took the tube to the palace. The morning air was crisp and cool, typical for early autumn in England. He wore his favorite hoodie and carried his phone in a special grip that helped him film steady videos. In his backpack, he had packed extra batteries, a portable charger, and a large cup of coffee he had bought from a shop near his hotel. The coffee was still hot, steam rising from the small opening in the plastic lid. As Marcus approached the palace, he could already see crowds of tourists gathering around the gates. People were taking selfies, children were pointing excitedly, and tour guides were explaining the history of the building in different languages. The palace looked even more impressive in person than it did in photos. The gold-trimmed gates gleamed in the morning sunlight, and the British flag waved proudly from the roof. Marcus walked around filming everything. He captured the changing of the guard ceremony, the impressive architecture, and the beautiful gardens visible through the gates. His followers were already commenting on his live stories, sending heart emojis and asking questions about London. He felt like a real travel influencer, sharing the experience with thousands of people who might never get to visit London themselves. But as the morning went on, Marcus noticed something. His video views were not as high as usual. His last few posts had gotten decent engagement, but nothing spectacular. He needed something bigger, something that would really grab attention, something that would go viral and help him reach that magical 100,000 follower milestone he had been chasing for months. That was when he spotted the palace guard, standing at attention near one of the sentry boxes. The guard was young, probably in his early 20s, with a serious expression on his face. He stood perfectly still, his rifle held at his side, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Tourists were already gathered around him, taking photos and trying to get his attention. Some people made funny faces, others told jokes, but the guard never moved a muscle. He was the picture of discipline and professionalism. Marcus watched for a while, studying the situation. He had seen so many videos of people trying to make these guards laugh or react. It was practically a tourist tradition. But everyone did the same boring things, pulling faces or asking silly questions. Marcus wanted to do something different, something unexpected that would really get people talking. His mind started racing with ideas. He thought about his coffee cup still warm in his hand. What if he pretended to accidentally splash it near the guard? No, that was too mean. What if he just held it really close and made the guard nervous? Still not interesting enough. Then an idea formed in his mind that made him smile. It was bold, it was unexpected, and it would definitely get a reaction. He would gently toss the cup toward the guard, not actually hitting him, of course, just close enough to surprise him. The guard would probably flinch or move, breaking his famous composure, and Marcus would catch it all on camera. It would be hilarious, harmless fun that would show these stoic guards were human after all. Marcus did not think about the consequences. He did not consider how the guard might feel, or what the rules were about touching or interfering with the king's guard. He certainly did not think about British law or how seriously the authorities took the protection of royal locations. All he thought about was the video, the views, the likes, and the followers. He positioned himself carefully, making sure his phone camera had a good angle. He started recording, narrating in a whisper to his future viewers about what he was about to do. His heart was beating fast with excitement and nervousness. This was going to be epic. This was going to be the video that changed everything for his channel. He imagined the headlines, other influencers sharing his content, maybe even getting interviewed about his viral moment. Marcus took a deep breath and prepared himself. The palace guard continued standing at attention, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Other tourists milled around, taking their photos, enjoying their morning at one of London's most famous landmarks. The sun continued shining, birds chirped in the nearby trees, and London carried on with its usual busy rhythm. Everything seemed normal and peaceful. Marcus had no idea that in the next few minutes his entire life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. His dream vacation was about to become his worst nightmare, and that innocent-looking video idea was about to teach him the hardest lesson he had ever learned. Marcus checked his phone one more time to make sure it was recording properly. The red dot blinked reassuringly in the corner of the screen. He could see himself in the preview window, grinning with excitement. Behind him, the palace guard stood motionless, completely professional in his duty. Marcus cleared his throat and spoke quietly to the camera, explaining his plan to his future viewers in an excited whisper. Then, without any more hesitation, Marcus took 3 quick steps forward and hurled the cup of hot coffee directly at the palace guard. What happened next occurred in slow motion, yet also incredibly fast. The cup flew through the air, spinning slightly, the lid popping off mid-flight. Hot, dark coffee sprayed out in an arc, splattering across the guard's pristine red uniform. The liquid hit the soldier's chest and face, and Marcus heard a sharp intake of breath. The guard's eyes widened in shock and pain as the hot beverage made contact with his skin. For a split second, there was complete silence. Even the nearby tourists seemed to freeze, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Marcus stood there, his phone still recording, his smile fading as he saw the coffee dripping down the guard's face and uniform. The reality of what he had just done started to sink in, but it was too late. The palace guard broke his stance immediately. His hand went to his face, wiping away the hot coffee that was stinging his eyes. His expression transformed from shock to anger in an instant. But before anyone could say anything, 2 other guards who had been nearby rushed over. Within seconds, 3 police officers who were stationed around the palace also came running toward the scene. Marcus felt his stomach drop. This was not how it was supposed to go. In his mind, the guard would have just flinched or moved slightly. Everyone would have laughed, and he would have gotten his viral moment. He had not expected this level of response. He had not expected to see actual pain on the guard's face, or the fury in his eyes, or the way other security personnel were now surrounding him. One of the police officers grabbed Marcus's arm firmly. Another officer took his phone from his hand before he could even protest. Marcus tried to explain that it was just a prank, just a joke, but the words sounded hollow and stupid even as they left his mouth. The officer holding his arm was not interested in explanations. He pulled Marcus away from the crowd, which had now grown considerably as people realized something serious had happened. Tourists were pulling out their phones, filming everything. Marcus could hear people gasping and talking in different languages. Some were saying things like, "Did you see that? And why would someone do that?" A woman with a strong Australian accent was telling her husband that some crazy American had just attacked a guard. Children were crying because the sudden commotion had scared them. The peaceful morning atmosphere at the palace had turned into chaos in less than a minute. The guard who had been hit with the coffee was being attended to by his colleagues. One of them was helping him wipe his face in uniform while speaking into a radio, probably calling for additional support or medical assistance. Marcus could see red marks on the guard's face where the hot coffee had burned his skin. The sight made him feel sick. What had he done? This was supposed to be funny, supposed to be harmless content for social media. Instead, he had hurt someone, really hurt them. The police officer holding Marcus began reciting something that sounded official and serious. It took Marcus a moment to realize he was being arrested. The words assault, battery, and interfering with the king's guard floated past him like they were not real. This could not be happening. He was just a tourist. He was just making a video. This was all a terrible mistake. More officers arrived on the scene. Marcus was turned around and felt cold metal handcuffs clicking around his wrists. The sensation was surreal and terrifying. He had never been in trouble with the law before, never even gotten a speeding ticket. Now he was being handcuffed in front of hundreds of tourists at Buckingham Palace in a foreign country. His mind raced with panic. What would his parents say? What would happen to him? Would he go to jail in England? As the officers led him away from the palace, Marcus caught one last glimpse of the guard he had targeted. The young soldier was being escorted toward a building, probably to get medical treatment for his burns. His once immaculate red uniform was stained with dark coffee, ruined by Marcus's stupid decision. The image would be burned into Marcus's memory forever. The walk to the police van felt like it took hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. People stared at Marcus as he passed, some with anger, others with disgust, and a few with what looked like pity. He kept his head down, unable to meet anyone's eyes. His hoodie, which had seemed so cool and casual that morning, now felt childish and inappropriate. He was not a fun-loving travel influencer anymore. He was a criminal being arrested in a foreign country. Inside the police van, Marcus sat on a hard bench, still handcuffed, still in shock. One of the officers sat across from him, writing notes in a small pad. The officer looked at Marcus with an expression of disappointment mixed with disbelief. Finally, he spoke, his British accent making every word sound more serious and official. The officer asked Marcus if he understood the severity of what he had done. He explained that assaulting a member of the King's Guard was not a minor offense. These were active duty soldiers performing an important ceremonial and security role. They were not actors or entertainers. They were not there for tourist amusement. They were serving their country with honor and dignity, and what Marcus had done was not only assault, but also an attack on a symbol of British tradition and respect. Marcus tried to apologize, tried to explain that he had not meant for anyone to get hurt, that it was supposed to be just a prank for social media, but as he spoke the words out loud, he realized how pathetic and empty they sounded. A prank. He had burned someone's face with hot coffee and called it a prank. He had disrespected a soldier doing his duty and called it a prank. He had broken the law in a foreign country and called it a prank. The van started moving, taking Marcus away from Buckingham Palace, away from his perfect London vacation, and toward a police station where he would face the real consequences of his actions. His phone, with its recording of the incident, was now evidence. His dreams of viral fame had come true, but not in any way he had imagined. The police station was nothing like the ones Marcus had seen in American movies or television shows. It was older, more formal, and somehow more intimidating. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as officers processed his arrest with efficient, calm professionalism. Nobody was yelling or aggressive, which somehow made everything feel worse. Their quiet disappointment cut deeper than anger would have. After his handcuffs were removed, Marcus was asked to empty his pockets. His wallet, hotel keycard, some loose change, and a pack of gum were placed in a clear plastic bag. An officer took his photograph from multiple angles and recorded his fingerprints using a digital scanner. The whole process felt mechanical and impersonal, like he was being catalogued as an object rather than treated as a person. Then came the questions. Marcus was placed in a small interview room with gray walls and a table bolted to the floor. Two detectives entered, a man and a woman, both middle-aged and wearing plain clothes. They introduced themselves, but Marcus was too nervous to remember their names properly. The male detective had kind eyes but a stern mouth. The female detective looked tired, like she had dealt with too many foolish tourists and had run out of patience long ago. They asked Marcus to explain what happened in his own words. He stumbled through the story, his voice shaking, his hands trembling on the table in front of him. He told them about being a social media influencer, about wanting to create engaging content, about thinking it would just be a harmless prank that would get a reaction. As he spoke, he could hear how ridiculous it all sounded. How could he have thought throwing hot coffee at someone would be harmless? The female detective asked if Marcus understood that the substance in the cup was hot. Marcus nodded miserably. She asked if he had considered that hot liquid could burn someone. Marcus nodded again. She asked why then he thought it would be harmless. Marcus had no answer. The silence in the room was suffocating. The male detective pulled out a tablet and showed Marcus something that made his blood run cold. It was his own social media account, his videos, his posts. They had already looked him up, already knew exactly who he was and what kind of content he created. The detective scrolled through Marcus's previous pranks, pausing on a few that now looked incredibly stupid and immature in this context. Marcus wanted to explain that those were different, that nobody got hurt in those videos, but the detectives already knew that. They were making a point. The guard Marcus had attacked, they informed him, was a 23-year-old soldier named James Patterson. He had served 2 tours of duty overseas, and had been awarded commendations for his service. He was not just a ceremonial guard standing for tourist photos. He was a trained soldier with a distinguished record. The coffee had caused first-degree burns on his face and neck. His uniform, which was custom-made and part of his official military dress, was ruined and would cost hundreds of pounds to replace. More importantly, James Patterson would likely have visible marks on his face for weeks, possibly longer. Marcus felt tears stinging his eyes. He had never meant to hurt anyone, certainly not a soldier, not someone who served his country. He kept repeating apologies, but the detectives remained unmoved. Intentions, they explained, did not change outcomes. What he meant to do was irrelevant. What he actually did was assault a member of the armed forces while they were performing their duty. That was a serious criminal offense under British law. The questioning continued for over 2 hours. They asked about his life in California, his social media career, his motivations for making prank videos. They asked if he had consumed alcohol or drugs before the incident. They asked if he had any history of violence or aggressive behavior. They asked if he understood the significance of the location where he committed his offense. Buckingham Palace was not just a tourist attraction. It was the official residence of the British monarch, a symbol of the nation, protected by serious security measures and laws. When the formal interview finally ended, Marcus was told he would be held in custody until he could appear before a magistrate. He would be charged with assault occasioning actual bodily harm, a crime that carried a potential sentence of up to 5 years in prison. 5 years. The number echoed in Marcus's mind like a death sentence. He was only 24 years old. 5 years in a British prison would destroy his life completely. Marcus was led to a cell, a small room with a thin mattress on a platform, a metal toilet, and nothing else. The door clanged shut behind him with a sound that seemed final and absolute. He sat on the mattress and put his head in his hands. For the first time since the arrest, he allowed himself to truly cry. Not quiet tears, but deep, heaving sobs that shook his entire body. He thought about his parents back in California. His mother, who had been so excited about his trip, who had helped him plan his itinerary and given him a guidebook about London. His father, who had been proud when Marcus's social media following started growing, who told his co-workers about his son the influencer. How would he tell them he was in jail? How would he explain what he had done? He thought about James Patterson, the guard he had burned. What was that young soldier thinking right now? Was he in pain? Was he angry? Did he understand it was supposed to be a joke? Or did he think Marcus was some kind of crazy person who wanted to hurt him? Marcus wished desperately that he could apologize directly, could explain that he never meant for any of this to happen. Hours passed slowly in the cell. Marcus had no phone, no watch, no way to tell time except by the changing light from the small window near the ceiling. He was brought a meal at some point, a sandwich and a cup of tea, but he could barely eat. His stomach was twisted in knots of anxiety and regret. Eventually, a duty solicitor came to speak with him. The lawyer, an older woman with gray hair and glasses, listened to his story with a neutral expression. She explained his legal options, the charges he was facing, and what he could expect in court. Her tone was professional but not unkind. She had clearly dealt with many young tourists who had made terrible decisions while visiting London. When Marcus asked what would happen to him, the solicitor was honest. The charges were serious. The victim was a member of the armed forces. The incident occurred at a location of national significance. The assault was filmed and witnessed by dozens of people. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His best hope was to plead guilty, show genuine remorse, and hope for leniency from the magistrate. Even then, a prison sentence was possible, though for a first offense he might receive a suspended sentence and deportation instead. Deportation. Never being allowed back into the United Kingdom. Marcus had dreamed of visiting London his entire life, and now he might be banned forever. All because of 30 seconds of terrible judgment, all because he wanted views and likes, all because he valued social media fame over human decency. The night in the cell was the longest of Marcus's life. He barely slept, tossing and turning on the uncomfortable mattress, listening to sounds from other cells and the footsteps of officers walking past. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the coffee hitting James Patterson's face, saw the shock and pain in the guard's expression. The image replayed over and over like a nightmare he could not escape. Morning came with a breakfast tray slid through a slot in the door. Toast, more tea, and some kind of porridge that Marcus could not identify. He forced himself to eat a little, knowing he needed energy for whatever came next. His solicitor had said he would appear in magistrate's court later that morning. The thought made his hands shake so badly he could barely hold the cup of tea. Around 9 o'clock, Marcus was taken from his cell and transported to Westminster Magistrate's Court in another police van. The building was imposing and official, with high ceilings and the smell of old wood and floor polish. People in business suits hurried past carrying folders and briefcases. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going except Marcus, who stumbled along between two officers like he was in a daze. The courtroom itself was smaller than he expected, but no less intimidating. Dark wood paneling covered the walls, and the magistrate's bench sat elevated above the rest of the room, making whoever sat there seem powerful and unreachable. Marcus was placed in a dock, a raised area surrounded by glass panels, making him feel like an animal in a zoo exhibit. His solicitor stood below him at a table, arranging papers and speaking quietly with the prosecutor. When the magistrate entered, everyone stood. She was a woman in her 50s wearing formal robes, her expression serious and impatient. She had probably seen 100 cases like this, tourists who came to London and did something stupid. But that did not make Marcus feel any better. If anything, it made him feel worse, like he was just another foolish American contributing to a stereotype. The charges were read aloud. Assault occasioning actual bodily harm. The words sounded heavy and official in the quiet courtroom. Marcus was asked how he pleaded. Following his solicitor's advice, he said guilty in a voice that came out as barely a whisper. The magistrate asked him to speak up, and he repeated it louder. Guilty. The prosecutor then presented the case against him. She described the incident in clinical detail, explaining how Marcus had thrown a cup of hot coffee at Lance Corporal James Patterson while he was performing his duties as a member of the King's Guard. She showed the magistrate photographs of James's burns, images that made Marcus feel physically sick. She presented witness statements from other tourists and police officers who had seen the attack. She showed clips from security cameras that had captured the entire incident from multiple angles. Then she showed something else, something Marcus had not expected. His own video, the one he had been recording on his phone when he threw the coffee. The prosecution had extracted it from his device, and now it was being played on a screen in the courtroom. Marcus watched himself grinning at the camera, whispering about his plan, then throwing the cup. The magistrate's expression grew colder with each passing second of the video. When the prosecutor finished, she emphasized several key points. The victim was a serving soldier. The location was Buckingham Palace, a site of national importance. The attack was premeditated and filmed for social media content. The offense showed a complete disregard for the safety and dignity of others in pursuit of online fame. She requested that the court consider the seriousness of the offense and impose an appropriate sentence. Then it was Marcus's solicitor's turn. She stood and spoke on his behalf, and Marcus felt a small surge of hope as she began. She explained that Marcus was a young man with no prior criminal record, that he had never been in trouble with the law before. She emphasized that he had pleaded guilty immediately, showing remorse and taking responsibility for his actions. She explained that Marcus had traveled to London as a tourist, that the incident was a moment of terrible judgment rather than malicious intent. She asked the magistrate to consider that Marcus was genuinely sorry, and that he had not fully understood the potential consequences of his actions. The magistrate listened to everything without visible emotion. When both lawyers had finished speaking, she asked Marcus if he wanted to say anything. His solicitor had prepared him for this moment. Marcus stood, his legs feeling weak, and addressed the magistrate directly. He apologized. He told her he was deeply ashamed of what he had done, that he had not thought about the consequences, that he had been focused on creating content for social media without considering how his actions would affect others. He said he wished he could take it back, that he would give anything to undo those few seconds. He mentioned James Patterson by name and said he was truly sorry for causing him pain and distress. His voice cracked with emotion, and tears ran down his face as he spoke. When Marcus finished, the magistrate was silent for a moment, reviewing her notes. Then she began to speak, and her words were measured and stern. She said that while she acknowledged Marcus's remorse, His actions represented a troubling trend of young people prioritizing social media engagement over common decency and respect for others. She said that palace guards were serving soldiers deserving of respect and protection, not targets for online entertainment. She noted that the burns suffered by Lance Corporal Patterson were painful and would leave marks, potentially scarring him. However, she continued, this was Marcus's first offense, and he had pleaded guilty without wasting the court's time. She was prepared to show some leniency, but the sentence must reflect the seriousness of the crime. Marcus held his breath, waiting. The magistrate sentenced him to 4 months in prison, suspended for 18 months. This meant he would not go to jail immediately, but if he committed any other offense in the next year and a half, he would serve the 4 months in addition to any new punishment. He was ordered to pay compensation to James Patterson for his medical expenses and the cost of his damaged uniform, a total of £1,200. He was also ordered to pay court costs and a victim surcharge. Finally, and perhaps most painfully, he was banned from entering the United Kingdom for 5 years. Marcus felt relief and devastation in equal measure. He was not going to prison right now, but he was essentially being expelled from the country, forbidden from returning for half a decade. His dream of exploring Britain, of visiting all the places he had read about and planned to see, was gone. More importantly, he had hurt someone, cost them pain and money, and tarnished his own reputation permanently. As Marcus was led from the courtroom, he noticed people in the public gallery filming with their phones. News of his arrest had apparently spread, and reporters or curious onlookers had come to watch the proceedings. His humiliation was now public entertainment, ironic given that he had been seeking exactly that when he threw the coffee. Back at the police station, Marcus was released after processing his payment arrangements and signing various documents. His passport was stamped with a notation about his conviction and ban. He was given his belongings back, including his phone, which he had not dared to turn on yet. When Marcus finally powered up his phone outside the police station, it exploded with notifications. Hundreds of messages, thousands of comments, countless tags and mentions. But as he scrolled through them, his heart sank further and further. His video had gone viral, but not in any way he had wanted. The video had spread across the internet like wildfire. Someone had filmed Marcus being arrested at the palace, and that footage had been shared thousands of times. Multiple news outlets had picked up the story. British tabloids ran headlines like, American tourist attacks royal guard in sick prank, and palace guard burned by coffee-throwing Yank. American news sites were also covering it, with headlines that made Marcus's stomach turn. His face was everywhere, frozen in that stupid grinning expression right before he threw the cup. Marcus sat in a small cafe near the police station, scrolling through his phone with growing horror. His Instagram account, which had 30,000 followers yesterday, now had over 200,000. But the new followers were not fans. They were people who wanted to tell him exactly what they thought of him. His direct messages were flooded with angry comments, some calling him stupid, others using much harsher language. People were digging up his old posts and criticizing everything he had ever done. Twitter was even worse. He was trending, but for all the wrong reasons. People were using hashtags like Palace Guard Assault and Coffeegate to discuss his case. Some were calling for him to be banned from all social media platforms. Others were demanding he face harsher punishment. A few were even creating memes from his arrest video, turning his worst moment into comedy for thousands of strangers. What hurt most were the comments from people he knew. Friends from high school were posting on their own accounts, distancing themselves from him, saying things like, I cannot believe someone I went to school with would do something so disrespectful. His former roommate from college had posted a long statement about how Marcus's behavior did not represent the values they had been taught. Even some of his social media collaborators, other small influencers he had worked with, were publicly condemning his actions to protect their own reputations. Marcus tried calling his parents. His mother answered on the first ring, and he could hear the worry in her voice before she even spoke. She had already heard about what happened, had seen the news reports online. His father was on the phone too, speaker mode, and both of them sounded devastated. They were not angry, which somehow made it worse. They were disappointed, confused, and deeply hurt. His mother cried as Marcus explained everything that had happened. She kept asking why. Why would he do such a thing? And Marcus had no good answer. His father, usually a man of few words, talked about respect and responsibility, about how they had raised him better than this. Neither of them yelled or blamed him harshly, but their quiet disappointment cut deeper than any punishment the court could have given him. After the call ended, Marcus felt more alone than he had ever felt in his life. He was in a foreign country, banned from returning with his entire social media presence now toxic. He opened his email and found his inbox overflowing with messages. Some were from brands he had worked with, terminating their partnerships. A company that sold travel accessories had sent a formal letter stating they could no longer associate with him. A tourism board that had been considering hiring him for a sponsored trip had withdrawn their offer. There were also messages from his landlord back in California. Apparently, other tenants in his apartment building had seen the news and complained about having a criminal living there. His landlord was not evicting him yet, but the message made it clear Marcus was no longer welcome. Even from thousands of miles away, the consequences of his actions were destroying his life piece by piece. Marcus spent the next few days in his London hotel room, afraid to go outside. The hotel staff had recognized him from the news, and he could feel their judgmental stares every time he walked through the lobby. He had 5 days left on his vacation, but the thought of being a tourist now seemed absurd. He spent hours lying in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the incident over and over in his mind. He tried to write an apology post for his social media, but every draft seemed inadequate. How could he possibly convey the depth of his regret in a few paragraphs? How could he make people understand he was truly sorry, without it seeming like he was just trying to save his reputation? He wrote and deleted dozens of versions, never posting any of them. On his 3rd day of isolation, Marcus received an unexpected email. It was from Lance Corporal James Patterson's lawyer. Marcus's heart nearly stopped as he opened it, terrified of what it might say. But the message was not a lawsuit or additional charges. It was an invitation to meet. James Patterson, through his lawyer, was offering Marcus the chance to apologize in person before he left the country. The meeting would be private, just the two of them and their legal representatives. It was not required, the email made clear, and Marcus was under no legal obligation to attend. But if he truly wanted to make amends, this was an opportunity to do so face to face. Marcus stared at the email for a long time. Part of him wanted to refuse, wanted to avoid the pain and humiliation of facing the man he had hurt. But another part of him, the part that felt genuine remorse and wanted to make things right, knew he had to accept. He owed James Patterson at least that much. 2 days later, Marcus found himself in a small conference room in a solicitor's office in central London. His hands were sweating and his heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. When the door opened and James Patterson walked in, Marcus felt like he might be sick. The young soldier looked different in civilian clothes. He wore a simple button-down shirt and jeans, and the burns on his face and neck were visible, even though they had started to heal. The marks were red and angry-looking, standing out against his pale skin. James's expression was neutral, guarded, impossible to read. They sat across from each other at a table, lawyers on either side. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Marcus, with a voice shaking with emotion, began to apologize. He told James how sorry he was, how he had not thought about the consequences, how he would regret his actions for the rest of his life. He explained that it was supposed to be just a silly prank, that he never intended to cause real harm, but he acknowledged that his intentions did not matter. He had hurt James, had caused him pain and embarrassment, had damaged his uniform and his dignity. James listened without interrupting, his face still unreadable. When Marcus finished, there was silence again. Then James spoke, and his voice was quiet but firm. He talked about what it meant to be a palace guard, about the pride he took in his service, about the discipline and training required for his position. He explained that Marcus had not just thrown coffee at him. He had attacked a symbol of British military tradition, had disrespected an institution that meant something to millions of people. But James also said something Marcus had not expected. He said he forgave him, not because what Marcus did was okay, but because he could see genuine remorse. James explained that holding on to anger would not help him heal, and that Marcus was clearly suffering consequences that would last far beyond the court sentence. He did not excuse Marcus's actions, but he chose not to let bitterness consume him. The meeting lasted less than 30 minutes, but it changed something fundamental in Marcus. Hearing James's forgiveness, seeing the burns on his face, understanding the full weight of what he had done, it all crystallized into a clarity Marcus had never experienced before. He could not undo what he had done, but he could choose how to move forward. The flight back to California felt endless. Marcus sat in his economy seat, unable to sleep despite being exhausted. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of the past week. The coffee hitting James's face, the courtroom, the disappointed expressions of the magistrate and his parents. The other passengers on the plane had no idea who he was or what he had done, and he was grateful for that anonymity. He knew it would not last once he landed. When Marcus arrived at Los Angeles International Airport, he half expected reporters or cameras, but there were none. His 15 minutes of infamy had already started to fade from the news cycle. Other stories, other scandals, other viral moments had taken his place. The internet moved fast, and he was already becoming yesterday's news. That should have felt like a relief, but instead it made him feel hollow. All that damage, all that pain, and now people were already forgetting about it, moving on to the next source of outrage and entertainment. His parents picked him up from the airport. The drive home was quiet and uncomfortable. His mother kept asking if he was okay, if he needed anything, while his father drove in silence, his jaw set in that way that meant he was dealing with difficult emotions. They had set up his old bedroom for him since Marcus could not face going back to his apartment right away. The room looked exactly as it had when he left for college, frozen in time, a reminder of who he used to be before everything went wrong. The next few weeks were the hardest of Marcus's life. He spent most of his time in that bedroom, avoiding social media, avoiding people, avoiding reality as much as possible. He had deleted all his social media apps from his phone, unable to face the constant stream of criticism and mockery. Friends stopped reaching out after a while, tired of him not responding or declining invitations. His social life, which had been so active and vibrant, shriveled to almost nothing. Money became a serious concern. The compensation payment to James, the court fees, and the victim surcharge had drained most of Marcus's savings. The brand partnerships that had been his main source of income were all gone. He applied for regular jobs, retail positions, and food service, anything that would pay the bills. But as soon as potential employers searched his name online, his applications were quietly rejected. One manager actually told him directly that they could not hire someone with his reputation, that customers would complain if they recognized him. Eventually, Marcus found work at a warehouse sorting packages for an online retailer. The job was physically demanding, repetitive, and paid barely above minimum wage. It was nothing like the glamorous life of a travel influencer he had imagined for himself, but it was honest work, and his coworkers did not seem to know or care about his past. He was just another person trying to make ends meet, and there was something humbling and grounding about that. 6 months after the incident, Marcus finally wrote the apology post he had been struggling with. He published it on his Instagram account, which still existed but which he had not posted to since before the trip. The post was long and heartfelt. He acknowledged what he had done without making excuses. He talked about the pain he had caused James Patterson and apologized publicly. He discussed the consequences he had faced and admitted they were deserved. Most importantly, he talked about what he had learned. Marcus wrote about the toxic culture of social media pranks, about how the chase for views and likes could make people lose sight of basic human decency. He talked about the importance of thinking before acting, of considering how our choices affect others. He admitted he had been shallow and selfish, focused on numbers and engagement rather than on being a good person. He encouraged his remaining followers to learn from his mistakes, to remember that real people are on the other side of every video, every prank, every attempt at viral fame. The response to his post was mixed. Some people appreciated his honesty and said they could see he had changed. Others said it was too little too late, that no apology could undo what he had done. Some accused him of just trying to rebuild his career, though Marcus had no intention of ever being an influencer again. A few people defended him, saying everyone makes mistakes and deserves a second chance. Marcus read all the comments with a strange detachment. Their opinions, whether positive or negative, did not define him anymore. He started doing volunteer work in his spare time. At first, it was community service mandated by his suspended sentence, cleaning up parks and helping at food banks. But after his required hours were completed, he kept volunteering. He worked with a program that mentored at-risk youth, talking to teenagers about making better choices than he had made. He was honest with them about his mistakes, about how one stupid decision had derailed his entire life. Some of the kids listened, others did not, but Marcus kept showing up week after week. Marcus also started therapy. His mother had suggested it gently after noticing how withdrawn and depressed he had become. The therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Rodriguez, helped him work through his guilt and shame. She helped him understand that while he could not change the past, he could choose how to move forward. She taught him that redemption was not about being forgiven by others, but about becoming someone worthy of forgiveness, whether that forgiveness came or not. In therapy, Marcus began to understand the deeper issues behind his actions. He had been so desperate for validation, so focused on external measures of success like follower counts and engagement rates, that he had lost touch with his own values. He had built his identity around being an influencer, and when that identity was threatened by declining views, he had made a catastrophic decision trying to save it. Dr. Rodriguez helped him build a healthier sense of self, one based on character rather than popularity. A year after the incident, Marcus received an unexpected letter. It was from James Patterson. The soldier had written to say that his burns had healed well, leaving only minor scars that would fade over time. He had returned to full duty and was doing well. He wrote that he appreciated Marcus's public apology and had heard about his volunteer work. James said he believed people could change, and he hoped Marcus would continue on his path of growth and redemption. The letter was brief but sincere, and Marcus cried when he read it. That letter became one of Marcus's most treasured possessions. He kept it in a drawer by his bed, and on difficult days when he felt overwhelmed by regret, he would read it and remember that forgiveness was possible, that change was possible, that he was more than the worst thing he had ever done. 2 years after the incident, Marcus's life looked completely different. He had been promoted at the warehouse to a supervisor position. It was not exciting work, but it provided stability and purpose. He had enrolled in community college, taking business classes in the evenings, thinking maybe someday he could do something meaningful with his life. He had started dating someone, a woman he met at his volunteer program who knew about his past but chose to see who he was now rather than who he had been. Marcus thought often about social media and the culture that had contributed to his downfall. He saw other influencers doing increasingly dangerous and disrespectful pranks, chasing that same dragon of viral fame that had destroyed his life. Sometimes he wanted to reach out to them, to warn them, to tell them it was not worth it, but he knew they would have to learn their own lessons in their own ways, just as he had. 5 years would pass before Marcus could return to the United Kingdom. He thought about it sometimes, wondered if he would ever want to go back. Part of him wanted to see James Patterson again, to thank him in person one more time. Part of him wanted to visit Buckingham Palace and make peace with that location, with that moment that had changed everything. But Marcus also understood that some journeys were internal rather than external. The real trip he needed to take was not back to London, but forward into becoming a better person. Every day he made choices that honored that journey. He treated people with respect and kindness. He thought before he acted. He remembered that every person he encountered was a real human being with feelings, dignity, and worth, not a prop for his entertainment or advancement. The tourist who had thrown a cup of hot coffee at a palace guard was gone. In his place was a man who understood the weight of his actions, who carried his mistakes with humility, and who worked every day to be worthy of the second chance he had been given. Marcus would never forget what he had done, would never stop regretting those few seconds at Buckingham Palace, but he chose not to be defined by his worst moment. Instead, he let it shape him into someone better, someone who used his experience to help others avoid similar mistakes, someone who valued character over clicks and humanity over viral fame. The result had been nothing Marcus anticipated when he walked up to that palace guard with a cup of coffee and a phone camera. He had expected views, likes, and followers. What he got instead was a lesson in consequences, responsibility, and the long, difficult work of redemption. It was not the story he wanted to tell, but it was the story he needed to live.